Hey folks, this is Riker, and Wolcen's highly anticipated first major content patch has finally released, and in this video we'll go over my first impressions. Titled Chronicle 1 Bloodtrail, this free content update for Wolcen includes gameplay improvements and new content. Most aRPGs these days have some kind of season or ladder or league reset, and Chronicles will be Wolcen's method of doing this. This patch brings a ton of balance changes, new cosmetics, a special seasonal event, and more. But for me, the big question has always been, will this first content be enough to save Wolcen? I've been following Wolcen's development for years. There was a time when people were painting this as the Diablo 4 killer, as the next-gen aRPG to beat them all. And playing in the early access, the alpha, the beta, the game showed a lot of promise. And when the game launched, it did really well. There were huge numbers of people playing the game. It peaked at somewhere close to 130,000 concurrent players for a new launch of a new game from a new studio, an indie studio making their first game. To reach that level of concurrent players was a testament to how much hype there was around this game. And unfortunately, the servers were not up to task. Players were quickly becoming frustrated at their inability to properly play the game. There were a number of bugs. The game just felt like it needed a little bit more time to iron out bugs. People were having their characters deleted. There were game-breaking bugs that some people were experiencing, others weren't. So some people were getting to enjoy the game, and those that were, mostly were enjoying the game at its core. There's a good game within Wolcen. And over the next couple of months, the devs were able to iron out a lot of the bugs and a lot of the server issues. But by that point, a lot of people already had a negative first impression of Wolcen. And even looking past the bugs and server issues, other complaints involved the game's balance, and the devs were also working on improving that. And so after having this initial huge spike of players for the past few months, Wolcen hasn't been able to peak above 1,000 concurrent players. But there was a glimmer of hope. We've known for a while that the devs were planning a big content update in the fall. And I've always said that that is Wolcen's chance at redemption, at winning back its players, at potentially solidifying itself or taking a step towards standing alongside the other big aRPGs that are currently out there. And now that content patch has released. I played it for a couple of hours. I'm halfway through Act 2 of the campaign. Here are my first impressions, and I'll be able to give a more thorough review in the future. So the first thing that bears mentioning is that if you want to experience the new content, you have to make a new character and play through the campaign again. Now again, it's not uncommon in action RPGs that when you launch seasons, it's always a fresh start. The devs have good reason for wanting that fresh start. You have to refresh the economy. You're making massive changes, massive balance changes to the game. You can't carry over old stuff into a new, fresh season. Now, there's still legacy mode. You're not losing your old characters. You can still play on that. But to move the game forward in a healthy state, healthy economy, healthy balance place without any broken old items, you gotta start fresh. That makes perfect sense. However, the one thing that I'm concerned about is that the game does force you to play through the campaign again before you can get to the end game stuff, before you can really try out the new stuff, the new content. Now I'm going to hang an asterisk on that because that's not fully the case, but there's at least the feeling that you have to get through the campaign again. And some aRPGs do this, where at the start of a new season or league, you have to play the campaign, you have to play the story again, but others don't. Others give you an option to just go straight to endgame mode. Like in Diablo 3, you have adventure mode, and Wolcen has this endgame mode similar to Diablo 3. But in the case of Wolcen, you have to play through the campaign again. And for some people, that might be a deal breaker, particularly people that weren't already fans of the game. If you're someone that had an initial bad experience with the game, are you going to be willing to go through the campaign again to really get a feel for all the new stuff? Because while there is new content that we do get to experience through the campaign, which we'll expand on a bit, to really experience all the balance changes, all the endgame stuff, you gotta get there. And right off the bat, I was playing with some friends who actually had a positive opinion of Wolcen, even in its current state, that just felt like, man, I don't want to have to play the campaign again. I think there was an opportunity lost here to give some shortcut through the campaign to allow players to skip the story mode and get straight to that end game. I'm concerned that this might potentially be a barrier to entry, a barrier to getting people to dive back into Wolcen. For people who are totally new players, it's a great experience to go through the campaign again for the first time with the new content weaved in, and I have to say it's weaved in very well. The whole Bloodtrail mechanic seamlessly woven in, and I'm quite enjoying it, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But I myself am also finding it tedious to go through the campaign again after having gone through it a couple times in the past. I think part of the reason why I find it less tedious in a game like Path of Exile is that in PoE, the story isn't as intrusive as it is in Diablo 3 or Wolcen, where there's so much dialogue to have to skip through, and sometimes unskippable things. But let's talk a little bit more now about the blood trails, the hunts added to the game. This is the most significant new mechanic added into Wolcen with this update. Basically, as you're going through the story or later in the end game progressing through zones, you will come upon basically a corpse or something, the start of a blood trail, which will start you on a hunt. Your first hunt is integrated very early into the campaign. If you're a new player, you wouldn't even be able to tell that this was added in. Again, it is seamless, very organic, and once you've started the hunt, you see this trail of a green miasma that you can follow. If ever you lose track of it, your pet, which is mostly cosmetic except for really the ability to point you towards the trail, will, as I just said, point you back towards the trail. And pets as well are something new added to the game. With this mode, there will be different cosmetic pets that you can get. But I digress. You follow the trail and it'll lead you to your next marker. And once you find that marker, you click on it, and then that brings up a choice for you to make. Now, a number of aRPGs do this now. Even Wolcen does this in some of its other game modes, where you get to pick between two different modifiers to the eventual challenge of the hunt. You're hunting down some beast, some creature, some boss, and so you're going to apply a modifier to the boss, or potentially to yourself. It'll modify that fight somehow, either in a positive or negative way, and oftentimes there are trade-offs to be had. So if you want more magic find on the boss, for instance, there'll be something that you got to do to increase its difficulty. Again, this is not an original idea in action RPGs, the ability to modify the challenge you're about to face in some way to make it more challenging to also increase the reward. But I really like how this is integrated. This feels fresh, inventive, and that's something that I again have felt that Wolcen does rather well, is it comes up with sort of new takes or new ideas. For instance, with the whole Champions of Stormfall, the meta game where you manage a pseudo town. So I like the idea of this blood trail. It feels a little bit reminiscent of something you would see in a new Path of Exile League, but I do get the sense that if this were a new Path of Exile League, there would be a bit more to the system. So again, you found your first, I guess, body, corpse, let's say, or marker within the trail. You select one of two modifiers, and then you continue on. You keep following the trail, you get to another node, and you select again between two other modifiers. And this can go on a couple of times before you eventually reach the boss fight. You fight the boss, you defeat it, and it's a neat little thing. I enjoyed the hunts that I went on. There was one where I fought one particular boss that, in fairness, I did pick the modifiers that made him as difficult as possible. And I paid for that by dying to him a couple of times because he kept one-shotting me. And based on what I'm reading on Reddit, it seems like this boss might be overtuned, or we haven't yet quite learned how to successfully evade this charge attack. Typically, in action RPGs or video games in general, when someone starts a charge attack, you learn to dodge out of its way, and it goes in a straight line. This one follows you. So I'm sure there's some way to evade that, but it consistently was one-shotting me whenever it would hit me with that attack. So I don't know if the damage is overtuned, or again, I just way overtuned the challenge in the modifiers that I picked, but I kind of liked it. I liked that I was punished for making those decisions without being adequately prepared for the challenge. So I've only been on 4 hunts. I'm halfway through Act 2. I'm enjoying the mechanics so far, but it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot more to it than that. We'll have to see in the end game how it's integrated, what more there is to do with that, because that by itself, it's a great feature. It's something great to have integrated into the game. I could imagine just going through regular dungeon levels in the end game and running into this. But at least from what I'm seeing so far, it doesn't feel like there's enough there to really have a whole expansion revolve around it. At least compared to something again like a Path of Exile League, which perhaps is an unfair comparison to make given that Path of Exile probably puts out more content than all other action RPGs combined. But again, it seems to be a positive addition to the game. Now, something that is unique to the hunts are Tributary Affixes. So these are affixes that can roll on gear, but you can only get them via hunts. Regular drops will not get you this. You can only get tributary items through hunts. And a tributary affix is one that comes with a malice. So it's going to be more powerful than a regular affix, but will come with some penalty. For instance, I can show you here the tributary items that I've run into. You can see they're marked by that little chain, 8% crit damage, but at the expense of 6% ailment chance score, 2% attack and spellcasting speed at the expense of 6% attack crit chance score. So I like the idea of these in principle. I'd imagine that you would want to find one that works best for your build where you're benefiting from something and the penalty doesn't really matter to your build. For instance, if you're running a build that doesn't care about ailments, then what does it matter if you have a penalty to your ailment chance score? As of right now, it doesn't feel as though the positive effect is positive enough to make these items feel that great, but I'm still very early game. I'd be curious to see at endgame how powerful these items are. So my stance on these affixes and these items, I'm glad they're in the game. I think they're a good addition. I just don't know whether they're balanced enough to be worth it. But that's a tuning issue and could be very easily resolved if there happens to be an imbalance there. Now, this update also includes one new skill called Talon Shot. You shoot out an owl, and then with the press of a separate key, you can detonate it. This was not intuitive to me at first. I thought that hitting the skill key a second time would trigger the premature detonation, but instead it was just firing out more owls. And I only after realized that you have to press a different key, at least in my case it's the A key, in order to detonate them. That took a little bit of getting used to, but it's a cool mechanic, and assuming the skill itself is powerful enough, it allows for some nice positioning where you can launch owls out into a crowd, and then when everything is kind of in the position that you want it, you can detonate them all at the same time. The idea of the skill is definitely cool. How balanced is it? Is it strong enough? Is it too strong? I'll have to see at the end game. I know some players were hoping for more than one new skill. Again, if we compare to Path of Exile, we typically see at least a couple new skills added every league, so I won't complain about there being only one new skill, but it doesn't feel like a huge amount of new content. And part of the reason I think that they did not add more new skills was because they added new damage type modifiers to pretty much all or close to all active skills. So if you look at your skill modifiers, we now have new ones at the bottom, and for the most part what these do is allow you to change what elemental damage type the skill applies. This was something of a complaint that players had in the past, that let's say they want to play a fire build, well, there's only a certain number of fire skills that you can work in. So now if you want to play a fire build, well, you can use almost any skill, and you just have to apply the fire modifier to it. I haven't had much of a chance to interact with the system, but in principle, it seems cool. 5 new unique items were added to the game, and the unique items as a whole got a tuning pass to be buffed. Again, this is positive. 5 isn't a huge number of new items, doesn't feel like a huge amount of new content again, but is nonetheless appreciated. On the monster side of things, we're getting 3 new bosses and 11 different elites for the hunts. I did certainly enjoy encountering in the hunts new monsters, new things to fight, new strategies to adapt to. The monsters look super cool. Again, everything in this game visually is extremely well executed. It is, without question, the best looking action RPG ever. And so it's nice to see and experience new monsters in the game. We then got a number of quality of life improvements, such as the addition of a loot filter. This is accessible by bringing up your inventory and then clicking this button here. And as you can see in the loot filter, you can filter out different types of items. I certainly appreciate the addition of a loot filter. I would hope that they could add an option where instead of having to go through every single item, you can just say, don't show me anything other than rare items. So loot filter, good addition, could add a bit more quality of life into it. There's a host of other quality of life changes, including a new crafting UI. We now have the ability to, when we're respecking our passive points, just respec one instead of respecking all of them. That's a great quality of life change. They've added a search function to the Gate of Fates. Again, great quality of life. Now if I want to make a crit build, I can just search crit, and now bam, I see everything that has the word crit in it. So all the quality of life stuff is great. They then made a whole host of balance changes. They've reworked affixes, reworked the Gate of Fates, reworked how character damage is calculated. They've changed so much. With so little playtime, it's really difficult to appreciate the extent of these balance changes, but they are extensive. And it overall does feel like that was almost the focus of this content patch. Now, one thing I have to mention is that I did run into some bugs as I was playing multiplayer. Again, single player, I never have bugs. As soon as I start inviting people into my party, start getting some issues here and there. Nothing that was terribly game breaking, but at some point, sound stopped working properly. Sometimes I glitched into some terrain. Sometimes you see my friends sliding around without their animation playing properly. Is it the end of the world? No, but it still makes the game feel unpolished. It feels like, 11 months after release, this stuff shouldn't be happening anymore. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's going to give some people a reminder of the problems that plagued the game at launch. So overall, my first impression here, overall positive, but not overwhelmingly so. I was hoping to be a lot more enthused and excited. It feels like a lot of effort was put into balance, which is great, but balance changes aren't something exciting to bring players back. There is cool and new stuff with this update, and I look forward to seeing when I finish the campaign and get to the end game how it's integrated there. But if I compare this to, say, a Path of Exile League, it feels smaller. It feels bigger than a Diablo 3 new season, of course, but for anyone who's expecting PoE level new leagues, there doesn't seem to be as much content in this as you get from GGG. So my first impression, this is a step in the right direction, good addition, almost only positive, but the fact that you have to play through the campaign again might deter some people from jumping back in, and anyone hoping for any kind of massive new content drop might be underwhelmed. Wolcen Chronicle 1 is good, but is it enough to take us to 10,000 plus concurrent players every day? Probably not. But it might be that first step in the right direction, and maybe if these chronicles can come out on a regular basis, if they can do like Path of Exile, 4 chronicles a year, keep building up. Path of Exile didn't reach huge success in 6 months. Over time, the game built up and built up and built up, and hopefully we can see Wolcen take that same path. But again, I do intend to play through the campaign, get to the end game, and really experience how things are balanced, the new additions, and all that. And that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.